After minimal pleading by the twins, everyone agreed on a movie marathon that afternoon. That way, they could look over the two films for Aku before dinner and see if there was anything wrong with them. After that, they could have dinner, then watch the film assignment with Deshin. It kept everything separate and gave them time to pack away the snacks. Even sitting there in a funk, Belda thought it was a good plan. Just watch the film, just be polite, but nothing welcoming, and call it an evening. Desala deserved that much. Even being slightly poisoned didn't seem bad compared to sitting there with Nestha. For the first two films, Belda had hunkered into the sofa beside Sephir. Even seated, the girl towered over her. It wasn't just that she was athletic. Her diverse physique made her the perfect 6'11", sable-haired poster girl for the Marines. She was the all-Shilvanti girl on campus, and her pixie-cut hair should have been waving in the wind, even when there wasn't any. Standing only 6'4" in bare feet, just being near her made Belda feel short, stocky and unattractive. The real killer was that Sephir was a great girl, a lot of fun, and not a pretentious bone in her body. Belda loved going to the dive meets and cheering her on, but standing too near always made her feel dumpy. Sephir was tall and lithe. When she dove, she was graceful enough to slip into the water like a fish, leaving barely a ripple. She didn't even have to do anything to stand out. If I wanted to stand out in a crowd, I'd need to climb on a box. That only made her feel petty. It seemed awful to resent anyone that nice. And just now, slouched down on the sofa beside her, Sephir's sheer size hid any view of that wretched bitch, Nesra Rache. Of all the low things to do, there was nothing worse than trying to steal a woman's guy. Of course, she talked about her fears with Professor Pelavon. Sort of. At the last moment, she turned the conversation she wanted about sticking a knife in Nesra's plans into a talk about how to keep Liam happy. It hadn't been a waste of time. She learned a few things about Professor Warwick that made her blush, but at the same time, it was kind of revealing. She hadn't thought much about Professor Pelavon's personal life before now, and the idea she was a married noble had never been important. Now, it didn't hurt that she had a partner when it came to keeping Professor Warwick's attention. The idea of getting an ally, maybe even another girl to court Liam, made a lot of sense. Or it would have, if only they settled a formal arrangement. Now, with everything at stake, it was impossible. She knew something was going on. She'd overheard Nessa whispering to Lark about the big surprise that was coming after Professor Warwick's interview tomorrow. She'd even peeked Belda's way when she said it. It had taken all her reserve not to confront her then and there. So, an ally. That still made sense, after things were settled. For now, it was going to be a case of getting to the punch first. Tomorrow she'd call Hope Klassen and request her 6th date with Liam. Then she could seal the deal with her as matriarch, for a formal understanding of betrothal. That would put Nespa firmly behind. Of course, she had to wonder what Liam really wanted. What if he'd decided to go with Nespa instead of her? She was a good catch. Before this, Belda always considered her a good friend. But taking a girl's man? That had been unforgivable for as long as Shill had been Shill. There wasn't anything lower. No. It was better to get a formal understanding with Hope, and then find out what Liam wanted. If she had the arrangement, well, it would be hard for him to say no, but if it came to it, she could let him go without too much cost, because his matriarch had approved. It tore her heart out to think of losing him, but at least people would know Liam had been stolen. Theft wouldn't stain her reputation like rejection. No matter what, she wasn't going to end up the dumpy farm girl from nowhere who couldn't keep her man. At least dinner would give her some time to think. Then she just had to watch the last film. Everyone's mind would be on Desala. Maybe she could even enjoy the movie. Jacksmee finished taking a bite of her dinner and considered the question. It was one of those moments when someone asked you a question just as you started eating. Usually, that kind of skill needed a professional waiter, slipping in at just the exact moment you were really enjoying a bite of steak to ask how your meal was, leaving you having to hastily gobble it down with all the grace of a Taurox, just so you could sputter out something nice. Waiters probably practiced. Kazlin asking when she did was just pure luck. And it was definitely Kazlin. No one knew exactly why, but the sisters had been giving real clues to who was who since last week. Kamara wore her student council pin some days, Kazlin wore her orchestra t-shirt on others. They were still finishing each other's sentences, but it was like someone had thrown a switch. There wasn't anything for it. Jax wrapped her tongue around the steak twice and shoved it aside, holding up a hand as she chewed and swallowed. The movies? I liked the first one better, but the second was okay. That was true enough, as far as it went, and she shrugged. You're the musician, but I didn't see anything upsetting there. What did you think, Belder? Jax looked over at where Belder was sitting and shook her head. The girl had been in a funk for days now, and by unspoken consensus, no one was talking about it. Why bother? Everyone knew she was getting ready to ask Liam's matriarch for a formal arrangement between their houses. They'd all seen Hope Klassen. That woman would put any girl off. Still, it was getting a bit much, and she held up her hand in water sign, the old sign language once used to signal each other during the dive, and resurrected for safety when they'd gone into space. The gesture was a second-degree version of "Hey," which placed it just above "Hey, grab that," and well below "Help." Regardless, it didn't even seem to register. Sighing, she slid a foot out and nudged her under the table. "Fleet command to Farm Girl. Come in, Farm Girl." Belder stopped brooding over her untouched dinner and looked up. "Huh? Sorry. What did I miss?" "Deep spell. We know what you're brooding over, but try not going totally over the reef, huh?" Jax tried to keep the exasperation out of her voice. Lynn asked if there's anything wrong with those movies before she and Mara sent them to Aku. "You do? That's great. Just marvelous." Belle turned an incandescent blue and glowered. The films were fine. Jax shrugged and looked back at Lynn, who responded with a slight shrug of "who knows" back. Goddess, the girl had it bad. Jax had enjoyed the films on one level and been bothered on another. In a way, they'd kind of gone into her family business. It painted a dark picture of how humans handled things, but even that might be useful. And it was something more from Earth. The better she understood the culture, the faster she'd get going. Well, once she got a job from her uncle. Every little bit helped. Anyway, there didn't seem to be anything that would upset Aku. But small wonder the sisters were taking good care with what they sent him. Goddess, an actual cliff singer to themselves, and they were treating him like a brother. That was weirder than the whole acting identical business, but maybe they'd make a move on him when he got back from his tour. Who knew? Jax checked her pocket for the note card with the name she was supposed to be watching. It was kind of neat in a way, sort of like being the character. If she could figure out who the character was. "What's the name of the film we're watching for the assignment?" It's called Romeo and Juliet," Kazlin chirped happily. "It's a song by Taylor Swift." "Is it? Professor Warwick sings it, but he said it was by Dyer someone." Desi shrugged. "I didn't know it was a movie." Nesfer settled in on the couch again, wishing she'd had more to eat. She hadn't felt like it at dinner, but now her stomach was grumbling, and it put her in a bad mood. A worse one, really. Desala arrived on time, and in the great invisible game of settling in, she'd taken the seat left open beside Letzi. Unfortunately, that left her sharing the same couch as Nessa and Pris. The twins were back on their customary perch off to the left, taking up the window seat, while Pris stretched out on the floor in front of Melondi and Desi. There should have been chocolate. If Desala wasn't there, there would have been. it was just another thing wrong with the evening. But no one was talking about the chocolate. It was hard enough just sitting that close to Nesta. "Right, does everyone have their cards?" Desi called out. "Who's the star of the show?" Belda held up the note card in her hand. She wasn't in the mood for Desi's incurable enthusiasm about an assignment right now. "I'm this Juliet Capulet." That got things started, and after talking things over, the girls arranged themselves. The movie sounded like a sensible drama about noble politics. Off to the left of the room, Melondi and Desi had arranged themselves as Ted Montague and his wife, Caroline. Sephir had been handed the part of Romeo, while Kamara and Kazim were watching as the characters of Romeo's cousins, named Balthazar and Benvolio. A strange name starting with the same letter. Easy enough. Off to the right, DeSala was still on the couch with Letzi, as Fulgencio Capulet and his wife, Gloria Capulet. Hatefully, Nessa had settled in beside her as her cousin named Tybalt, while Larks was there as her other cousin named Abra. Seemingly without a side, Lark's friend Bree grabbed some cushions and settled down on the floor to watch as Mercutio, while Jaxby and Pris settled in as Paris and Captain Prince. DeSala muttered a bit over being a man, but everyone knew that gender worked backwards on Earth. Sephir said if she could play a guy, then DeSala could play the head of a whole family. That seemed to settle things, and Desi hit play. 2 houses, both alike in dignity. That was a good start. At least this seemed like a film everyone could easily relate to. It felt like a punch to the gut. Twice. Everyone cried out when Romeo was overcome with grief and poisoned himself. But then Juliet woke up, found him, and shot herself with his gun. Bree hadn't gotten sick this time, but she looked beside herself. She wasn't alone. Desi looked a little grey, but she cleared her throat after Mel shut off the video. "So, I guess we should go around the room and see what everyone thinks." "What I think? What the deep is wrong with those humans? They can't make up their minds. They just blunder around destroying everything and everyone." Bree looked up from the floor aghast. "That was a horror story." "I don't think that's what they were going for, but maybe it kind of was." Desi was taking notes for everyone. It helped. The atmosphere had become desolate after the couple died, and being chewed out by Pris's character as Captain Prince, the chief of the interior, hadn't helped. "Sephir, you were Romeo. What did you think?" "They wound up dead." Sephir had been beating the seat cushions ever since the apothecary gave out the deadly poison, but had looked sickened ever since Romeo swallowed it. "The world around them was just too fucked up to accept they were in love. But that was the world they grew up in. It wasn't their fault. Their parents set the rules and wouldn't give up their fight." That led to some looks at DeSala and Melondi, who both shifted uncomfortably under the attention. Desi made a face and looked over at her. "What about Juliet, Belda?" Belda had been quivering for most of the movie. The party, the dancing, and how it all fell apart. She'd had enough pretending. Jax knew. She'd said so at dinner. They all did. She stood up over Nesfa and pointed at her. "This is all your fault. You couldn't just let it be. You just had to dive in." "Hey, I was just protecting you from Romeo and..." "Don't give me that. Sticking your tuss in with Liam was going way too far." The gall was unbelievable, and Belda threw her hands in the air. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" "Well, I sure as the deeps don't," Bree grumbled from the foot of the couch. "You stay out of this," Belda snapped at the girl. "Hey, you almost stood on me." Bree looked up at her, shifted to one side and huffed. "If you're going to stomp me into the carpet, I get to ask why." "It's her boyfriend's dowry." Nesper looked at Bree and sighed. Liam and I set up a lawsuit and I got my mum to pay out on it if I convinced Professor Warwick to do an exclusive interview. It's good money, and Liam wanted to bring you a big dowry. She looked up from the floor at Belder, and her lower lip trembled. I'm sorry. You're... Belder's mind swam as she stammered. She knew she looked like a Taurox that had just been smacked with a hammer. The image didn't help at all. You're sorry? I am. I just wanted to get back at my mothers for ripping off human media so they don't have to hire any writers. Being a writer is all I've ever wanted to do, and working with Liam was a great chance to make them stop. It seemed like such a good plan. Nesfer cocked her head in shame as she looked back wretchedly. I know with your family that you can afford to take care of Liam. I just wanted to help. You're a good friend. Please, forgive me? I forgive you, Belder managed. It felt like being drunk and waiting to stagger, so it came as no surprise to find herself flailing back into her seat. It helped that Bree had given her the push. She was looking at her with consternation as she checked her ponytails. How do you people get through your homework? She asked the room, then looked back at Belder accusingly. It's just a movie. It isn't, though. Desala spoke up into the silence. Quiet throughout the film, Nesra imagined she was stewing over having to be there, but the bleak look on her face changed her mind. Desala shook her head, reaching for the right words. Don't you get it? You're all looking at the kids and seeing how tragic it is for them, but you aren't putting yourself in your parents' shoes. Don't you see what parents can do to their children? It's not all about two lovers who get some bad breaks. It's watching the fight you started go on until it kills all your children and tears your whole house down. Even Desi stopped writing. She's right, Melondi said quietly. And it's even worse than that. Because you're still there to suffer. You didn't fix things. You didn't make it right. Your failures mean you'll lose everything and everyone you love. And it's all your fault. It was the first day of Shell, and Vadim had made his way over to Durham Tory. Dad had been in a good mood after helping Professor Warwick with the wedding plans. Mostly. Warwick was insisting that he'd wear his uniform suit, as his soon-to-be daughter was getting it fixed. Dad was insisting that any civilized wedding with a pan-denominational couple should have at least 2 changes of clothes, and preferably 4, with changes for each faith and the party clothes. Warwick stated flatly he wasn't wearing short shorts and pasties. Dad had done his very best and only thrown 2 long sighs, but secretly he was overjoyed to be helping out with the planning. It seemed like a good morning to take time off. He could run his errand and be back in time for the lunch crowd. Of course, telling Dad he was getting Melondi a present didn't hurt. Dad practically shoved him out of the door after that. All of which brought him to the storefront of Tandri Sisters Carpentry. The woman was looking at the pictures of the Bokken with a jaundiced eye. It's a stick. It's wood, yes. Vadim wouldn't have been sure which of the Tandri sisters was there on the other side of the counter, since Dad had dealt with the remodeling both times. The name tag on her coveralls said Alara, which should have cleared up the matter. Somehow he still felt like he missed giving some sort of code word. It's still a stick. Dealing with people was a skill. Dad didn't work with tradeswomen to get what he wanted, so much break over them like a cresting wave, ordering around whoever was unlucky enough to be caught in his path. It was too late to try that now, even if that had been his manner. It wasn't, and it left him with a sinking feeling. What kind of suitor am I for a princess? She could run planets and I can't even order a stick. Bokken? It's a Bokken. Big help I'll be. But no, that kind of thinking never got you anywhere. He didn't need to change his clothes. He needed a whole new Vadim. He cleared his throat and tried again, giving his best smile. I'm told it's very traditional. Maybe it was the difference in years, and maybe it was the picture of the Tandri sisters on the wall. It was a large family. Whatever it was, Alara Tandri seemed utterly immune. At best, it got him a raised eyebrow. And what do they do with these things? Hit each other, I guess. Gold stuff. Vadim hit the pit of resentment rising inside him. The firm advertised special orders right over their door. If this woman was a waiter, he'd have fired her. Maybe it was just a case of dropping a name. Dad did that. Selectively, sure, but how many times would he have to see this woman? It's for Empress Zarika's Academy for Young Ladies. I'm told these Balkan are vital equipment for their new sports team. If it catches on, this could mean plenty of people want them, you know. The school full of nobles? The very same. Vadim smiled broadly as the carpenter peered at the pictures with renewed interest. That was more like it. And they're going to hit each other with big sticks? I suppose? Was he getting anywhere? It seemed like he had been. They're called Balkan. Yeah, sure, whatever. Heck, you should have led with that. Alana grinned and yelled into the back of the shop. Hey, Yandra, Jendal, we got an order for some sticks. Vadim sighed inwardly and just took the win. Did it matter how you got the win, as long as you got it? That might be something to ask. It definitely seemed like the sort of thing a princess's boyfriend ought to know. Pushing aside Melondi's door, Desi leaned against the wall and looked her over. She was a princess, after all, who looked just like her when she was in a mood. Melondi, princess of the Shorvanti Imperium, was in a funk, and it showed. Okay, you've been moping around ever since yesterday. What's wrong? I never told you about what happened to my father. The Empress doesn't talk about it. It's not supposed to be mentioned by anyone, ever. Melondi had propped herself up against her headboard and was looking off the end of her bed like it was a light year away. She closed her eyes. Don't you get it? What if I mess it all up? What if I'm just another link in a chain and I drag everyone down? Melondi rolled over and sat up, looking at Desi. I wasn't supposed to be anything more than the spare heir. You keep coming back to that, and you keep bouncing off the fact that I'm not supposed to be here at all. I wasn't supposed to find myself getting adopted, Princess. I put my mind to changing my life when I had nothing, so don't tell me you can't do it. Desi shrugged herself off the wall and ambled over to sit in the chair beside Mel's bed. You have a lot more going for you than I. I know. I'm a princess, and I meant that you've got us. Desi shook her head. Trust me, you could do a lot worse. I got here with some forged papers and smiled a lot, but I didn't have anyone looking out for me, here or at home. Desi, it's not that easy. No one was shooting at you either. Mel rolled onto her side, clutching one of her pillows. Someone tried to kill me twice now. What if I get you hurt? Hey, we're not trying to poison you. Desi shrugged and tried her best at looking nonchalant. We're the ones who have your back, and we're here because we want to be. They tried to poison you just because you were near me. That makes twice when you almost got hurt because of me. Meh, I'm too cute and smart to die, she grinned, waggling her eyebrows. You look like Warwick doing that. Melondi sighed and stuck out her tongue. Anyway, if the goddess blessed you with invulnerable cuteness, why didn't you get a boyfriend first? Too poor. There's not a lot of money and good advice, Desi shrugged, then canted her head seriously. Still, I gave you a shove, and now you have Vadim. What are you going to do about him when your mother gets home? Stand my ground, not mess it up. Melondi sighed and rolled herself upright, facing Desi. She was still grimacing, but it had a determined look to it. It just feels like so much to handle, and I don't have all the pieces. See? You're learning already. Desi grinned at her, as if it was easy. Just remember that you have us, then take it one day at a time. I'm trying, and I do appreciate everything you've done. Melondi reached out and hugged Deshin hard. I know I don't say it enough, but you're a good friend, Desi. Told you I'd give the best advice. Yeah, you do. Tom settled down in the chair for his interview with time to spare, and perched the cane from Prince Adam between his knees. It had been an unexpected gift, and a lot flashier than the unadorned metal shaft he'd been using. It looked good there. He'd never pictured himself as a walking stick kind of guy, but it had benefits. He was sitting higher off the ground than last time, and he wondered what to make of that as Leandri Trelandi grinned and practically licked her lips. "You're coming up in the world since our last interview, Professor. The producers decided to make you look taller on camera." "That was nice of them." Tom leaned forward and smoothed out his shirt. Perched a good 6 inches off the floor, he nearly looked Trelandi in the eye. "Are they shooting for a hard interview or something softer this time?" Leandri Trelandi studied Tom, with rather more care than she had the first time around. "This is going to be a live interview. Are you giving me a choice?" "Fair's fair. Ask what you need to. As long as I'm not some rogue human vigilante beheading people," Tom shrugged. "I have no idea how that story got put out, but I really need to ask." "I think I can manage something softer than Bloodthirsty Savage." Leandri arched an eyebrow at him, but she was trying to cover a grin as the clock counted down. "I might even be able to pull off Domesticated." "I think that's my fiancé's line." The camera woman leaned in, waving for attention as Leandri Trelandi turned to the camera. "In 3, 2... This week, we welcome back Professor Thomas Warwick of Empress Zerika's Academy for Young Ladies. He's been making his way in the capital and teaching some of our nobility's best young minds, but was recently called on to place himself in harm's way when a veteran soldier who failed to take her medication began attacking students. We have him with us tonight on Meet the Imperium." Leandri Trelandi turned and gave him a smile like he'd just earned a cookie. "Well, Professor, usually it's the storybook princess that swoops in to rescue the defenseless innocents." "Sorry, I'm afraid there's no princess in this story." Tom picked out his words with care, thinking about his friends back in the day. It rankled not to call Tejo a psychopathic whack job, much less a hired assassin, but that was alright. He still felt the Shorvanti overused their PTSD drugs, but as long as was being forced to spin the story, he could still make the best of it. Mental illness is a terrible thing, and coming from a world that didn't know the benefits of imperial medicine, I can tell you what a terrible trauma some soldiers face. I was very fortunate. Any Shorvanti soldier is a formidable warrior. I suspect it was her impaired judgment that let me prevail. "And you were gravely wounded in the process." Leandri Trelandi took on the wistful expression most shills seem to wear at the very thought of a male being hurt, before rallying her professional face. "Nonetheless, we're all very grateful that you were able to do so. Tell me, do all human men have a working familiarity with melee combat? Is this a standard part of your education? Reading, writing, decapitation?" And there it was. Say yes and risk elevating humans as a threat. Saying no was safe, but it felt like a betrayal and a lie. Humans weren't victims, and he was already being forced to play the feisty damsel in distress. Whatever the version, there were limits. Human men and women consider martial arts to be good exercise. I was fortunate to have the skills I needed. And the time to put my hands on one fucking sharp sword. Thank you, Master Kawachi, wherever you are. Leandri Trelandi's expression turned into a mask of polite and gentle affirmation. Since he hadn't torn the interview apart in the first 5 minutes, maybe he'd earned that one. "You'd met Arali Teja before under some interesting circumstances. Tell us, did you know who your attacker was?" Marvelous. Time for lie number 1. Putting on a thoughtful frown, he searched for a better answer than, "I noticed when she was taking a shot at the princess." That wouldn't go over well with the interior censors, and Lamana Davari had threatened him with the most inventive jail sentences if Kalira's identity got out. Honestly, it was all so confusing at first that I didn't. I was mostly concerned with the safety of my students. I can only imagine, Professor. Leandri Trelandi leaned forward, the picture of concerned interest. A great deal has been made of humans in combat. What was going through your head at the time? Lie number 2 was there in his mind. She'd want to hear the story of being afraid of a Shilvanti warrior in the dark. The public would want it. It would make him seem all the more plucky. It would sell with their perceptions. It was safe. Ah, screw it. Tom sucked in a breath and shrugged. Mostly, I was angry. I'm sorry? Angry. Mad. Oh, the whole I don't want to die was there, but pushing it aside is a human thing. Tom nodded, as Leandri Trelandi tried not to gawp like a fish. To her credit, she did very well. I think one thing Shilvanti and humans share is a deep need to protect children. The idea of someone coming after my girl seriously pissed me off. I see. Credit where it was due. Leandri Trelandi was a professional on one of the top-rated shows in the galaxy. She wasn't a slouch, and she rallied. And once you realized who your assailant was, how do you feel about that? In hindsight, it's fair to say I have a lot of mixed emotions, particularly given the history between our peoples. He was prevaricating, and he knew it. On the other hand, Order 24 kept him from mentioning the princess. That didn't mean he had to mince words. As I was laying on the floor bleeding out, I believe my last thought was something like, "Gotcha." He spread his hands in a modest shrug. It's hard to be sure. Gotcha? I'm sure that things have changed a great deal at the school for you since then. How has this affected your relationship with your students and the faculty? I'd say we're closer than ever. Honestly, some of the girls want to learn how to use a sword. That was true, as far as it went. I still have hopes that sharing humanities, arts, and culture will help transition my people into the Imperium. Leandri Trelandi's eye might have twitched, the one not facing the camera. Without a word, her expression spoke volumes of, "You're going too far," and inwardly he knew she was right. If he didn't want humans painted as savages, then he shouldn't play the part. Even so, she looked like she was rising to the challenge. That's very commendable, but how have the parents responded to the incident? Canting her head thoughtfully to one side, she asked candidly, I'm sure this incident has been very upsetting for many of them. I believe so, but our head administrator has pointed out that I nearly gave my life to protect their children. Tom couldn't fob that one off, and he didn't intend to. Our head librarian did give her life during the incident. I think that speaks volumes about how seriously we take our charge at the Academy. And yet it was at the Academy you first encountered Admiral Tejo. Leandri Trelandi was looking at him thoughtfully. What was the exchange you had with Admiral Tejo at the award ceremony, when we all saw you together for the first time? That one was unexpected. It had taken a lot to muster up forgiveness for Arali Tejo, when all she'd been was a physical symbol of the Imperial military. He still knew next to nothing about the woman, but she'd taken a shot at Malondi, at him, at his future daughter. Was there still forgiveness there? Maybe for the symbol, but Arali Tejo was no longer any symbol in his mind. She made herself into the person who tried to take his girls, just like they'd taken his daughter. All bets were off. At the time, I tried to express the best wishes from the Academy to the Admiral for her speech. Unfortunately, her reaction to my presence may have been a clue to her state of mind, Tom said neutrally. It was true, but just because the truth could be beautiful, didn't mean it always was. Taking a complex problem and rendering it down into a simplistic answer wasn't a lie, but the words tasted like ash anyway. There was so much more to be said. It's a shame to see the toll still being taken on people, both here and on Earth. Leandri nodded sympathetically. Still, you've left your home, come across the galaxy. She looked in control of the interview again, confident. The ingenue had left the building, and now she was playing hardball. What had he said? Fair was fair. You've committed what some people will surely see as a crime. Tell me, do you have any regrets? Regrets. Did he have regrets about leaving Earth? About not being dead inside, waiting for the day his physical end matched the death of his spirit? About meeting Miv and finding happiness when he least expected it? Or gratification in teaching? About finding a daughter again? There were still times when he felt like a fish out of water, but how could he feel regret? No, though I think you're asking the wrong question. The wrong question? Leandri Trelandi raised an eyebrow. She'd been good to him as a reporter, and hadn't raked him over the coals either time, but she was still proud of what she was. Her smile was indulgent, and maybe it was his imagination, but it also seemed a bit smug. How is it the wrong question? Well, for all our virtues and faults, humanity was still finding its way. Tom shrugged, as if the whole matter were of no consequence, and pressed on. The camera woman was pointing to the clock. They were almost out of time. I'll admit my people have done some really stupid things, but we've managed some accomplishments that are pretty miraculous too. I don't want to seem disingenuous, Professor. I don't disapprove of humanity, and we all appreciate you being here. Leandri Trelandi's smile was indulgent, satisfied. He imagined the same smile on Shovanti, watching all over the planet. I guess I just don't see the issue. There was less than a minute left on the clock, and Tom grinned. Well, for better or worse, you're letting a human teach your kids, aren't you? It's either the brightest or dumbest thing the Imperium's ever done. The light went out on the camera as the camera woman called, "Time!" Hope Klassen turned off the screen, closed her eyes, and slowly rubbed the bridge of her nose. She spent almost as much of her life on Shill as Earth now, forging relationships, creating a career. Warwick had been here for half a year. She'd been waiting days for his student to call and ask permission to marry Liam, and, oh yes, he was on the news for a casual beheading. Even though part of her time was spent in administration, she still taught the occasional class. God has help me if my students see any of that. She shook her head. It was pure exasperation rather than intent, but it just had to be said. Sweet heaven, I could kill him.